Hey everybody, this is Andy Hall. You are watching The Late Show with my co-host Jack Matirko. How you doing, Jack?
I'm doing okay, Andy.
Doing okay. That sounds like you got a bit of resignation in your voice when you're saying that, Jack. But we'll
Well,
skip
you
over.
know, there's
Yeah,
we've changed who's steering the ship of state, but boy, it's going to take a while for it to turn around. That's
indeed.
what I've got
Our
to say.
guest, our guest tonight, and we're going to talk about so many different topics. Is Professor Adam Kotsko, and I'm going to read his small bio on his site. Adam Kotsko is on the faculty of the Shimer Great Books School at North Central College, where he teaches widely in the humanities and social sciences. His research focuses on political theology, continental philosophy, and the history of Christian thought. He is the author, most recently, of Neoliberalism's Demons, which argues that the contemporary political economic order functions on the basis of the logic of moral entrapment that echoes the theological concept of demonization. Also written, Agamben's philosophical trajectory. I'm sure he's going to correct me on how I pronounce that. A comprehensive study of the Italian philosopher, emphasizing how his thought has evolved in response to political events. Adam Kotsko, thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
I read through bits and pieces of neoliberalism's demons, and I learned a lot. I'm going to tell you this right now. And it made me think about neoliberalism, neoconservatism, our current situation in the country, and what got us here. For people who aren't acquainted with neoliberalism, how would you define that?
Neoliberalism is a political economic agenda that's been going on for a generation now, ever since Reagan came into office in 1980 and a little bit before even. And the goal of this agenda is to change and transform society so that as many parts of our lives as possible are structured as though it's a competitive market. That it's not just that we have like certain tasks that we go to the market for, certain things that are economic, and then we have like other parts of our lives. Everything should be economic. Everything should be capitalistic. Everything should be a market competition.
And how does that compare to a time in the country that we weren't in a neoliberalistic kind of system?
I think that in the post-war era, which many people regard as kind of a golden era of American history, when there was broadly shared prosperity, when there was a large and growing middle class. This was a time when kind of the political leaders and economic leaders kind of picked and chose between different economic models. They used capitalist markets for areas where they seemed to be best suited, but they were also open to a more active hand of the state in planning things. They were more open to social safety nets that gave like unconditional support to people that didn't depend on them going on the job market. And that kind of mixed economy started to fall by the wayside once Reagan came into office, and has been gradually chipped away by both Republicans and Democrats have joined in doing this. For instance, Bill Clinton was the one who signed the law placing a time limit on welfare benefits and tying it to the idea that you have to be seeking a job in order to qualify for them. So that undid the idea that you had some like unconditional bottom level support that you couldn't fall below. And there are a lot of examples of this that I'm sure we'll get to.
Sure. Did Ronald Reagan corrupt the middle class with tax cuts?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that Ronald Reagan more drew on the pre-existing corruption of the middle class, especially the white middle class and their racism. For a long time, this was the greatest crime of the post-war order, that all these generous welfare systems were set up so that basically only white people could benefit from them. Like Social Security, when it was originally passed, it excluded agricultural workers, and that the vast majority of them were black. And like there's all these kind of like ostensibly race neutral standards, but that everybody knew that they were meant to exclude black people from this type of support. And after the civil rights movement started to have success in pushing back against this type of segregation, and a lot of these barriers to black people enjoying the benefits of the welfare state started to fall by the wayside, suddenly the right wing convinced everybody that black people were the sole beneficiaries of the welfare state, and that they were leeching off the generosity and good spiritedness of white people. And this had to end. And I think another thing that contributed to this is that a lot of the benefits that white people were getting were actually not obviously government benefits. They seemed to be free market benefits, like a mortgage. For instance, you take out a mortgage, it seems like you're being a responsible person, you're making an investment in your home, becoming an adult and all of this. And it seems like you're pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, but the 30-year guaranteed fixed rate mortgage would not exist without government subsidies. And so these people would see like, I earned my mortgage, I earned my home, and yet these people are asking for a handout, not realizing that there was kind of a handout built into the system that was invisible to them. And I think Reagan was a very shrewd politician in exploiting the kind of weird structure of how these benefits were set up, and the way that some things were obviously government benefits and some things were not. And he painted the government benefits as though they were the sole province of racial minorities, and therefore were somehow leeching off of the republic.
This is just occurring to me, but that's interesting because Reagan basically capitalized on Nixon in a way where it was just like, well, you can't trust the government because they're corrupt. How do you know? Because our last guy was absolutely corrupt.
Yeah, that's interesting. I doubt that he really made that case explicit. Like he probably didn't want to refer to, my Republican predecessor, Richard Nixon. But he definitely was benefiting from the distrust of government that had occurred at that time. And to be fair, there were also very serious economic problems that were taking place in the 70s too. Stagflation, where inflation was increasing rapidly while unemployment was happening, which the two of those should not have been able to happen at the same time, according to the dominant theory. And I mean, there was a lot of problems going on in the 70s, and there were a lot of different solutions proposed, including some that would have expanded the welfare state. Nixon almost approved a universal basic income. There's all kinds of like lost alternate timelines out there, but the one that we wound up getting shunted into is the stupid Reagan one that is still killing us all.
I heard, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, that Nixon was ready to sign something akin to universal health care. And it was the Democrats who wanted to get more in the bill. Is that true? Do I have that right?
I don't know all the details of the legislative debate, but that makes sense. And I think that just shows that, today's Democrats, they would be grateful to get like 10 cents discount on your premium or something like that out of the Republicans. But they had confidence that expanding the welfare state in that way would be popular, and like that they were actually pressuring Nixon to do more. That just shows what a different era they were living in.
Right. Adam, I have a 15-year-old and an 18-year-old, and I'm 52 right now. I'm old enough to have lived in a home where my father worked for the same job. He worked for the telephone company for 30 years. One job. He was able to afford a house, a vacation house, and 3 cars. All just. He wasn't in management either. He was just a blue-collar guy, just working and saving his pennies. Did neoliberalism destroy that lifestyle?
I think it did. And it very intentionally did. There was a desire to kind of reassert an economic hierarchy, to commodify labor, to make it so that we couldn't expect that type of long-term career security. And of course, to break unions, because unions were the main force that were allowing people to get those types of wages and that type of security. And basically, they wanted to break the unions so that management and stockholders could operate for their sole benefit at the expense of workers.
A lot of people today, I was explaining this to my girlfriend, exactly how high the tax rate was, let's say during Eisenhower's tenure, and exactly how much it's gone down since that time. It's pretty astounding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there at some points, the top marginal tax rate was 90%. That if you made anything over a certain amount, 90% of it would go to the government. And this was a compromise. FDR wanted to have 100% tax rate, which would be effectively a universal income cap, that you could not earn any more than this amount. And he compromised that it was only 90%. But the effect is still the same, because the company, they're not going to give people a raise above that level, because they're effectively just making a donation to the government at that point.
Right.
So that money has to go elsewhere, and it tended to go towards the wages of the workers. Whereas now our incentives are set up so that there's no limit to how management and stockholders can enrich themselves, and therefore there's no pressure to put that revenue towards the workers as there did exist previously.
So before these tax cuts, CEOs, heads of company, they weren't getting paid this kind of astronomical wage that we see today.
No, that was unheard of. And they also didn't see themselves as operating exclusively in the interests of the shareholders. They viewed the role of their role as kind of mediating between the interests of the workers, the shareholders, and the broader community. And it's the neoliberal paradigm that came along and said, no, the shareholders own the company. They're the only ones that you're accountable for. You need to maximize the value that you're delivering to them. And that's the only behavior that you can justify, or that's the only behavior that's like objective or economically sound or something like this. And I mean, the results are pretty clear. It was a hugely destructive.
When you tell students these facts in your classroom, what kind of reactions do you get?
Yeah, I mean, to them, it's kind of almost a fantasy world to think that things could have been different. Like, I just was teaching a course. It was on like concepts of utopia and dystopia, and we talked a lot about like the environment. And a lot of them seemed to get that there were very serious problems, but at the same time, they were very fatalistic about the possibility of changing them. Like, corporate power is going to stand in the way of this. I guess there's nothing to be done. You know, there were exceptions to this, but that seemed to be kind of the mainstream solution, that corporate power always wins at the end. There's no effective counterweight. They are not living in an era where unions exercise any significant power. They, frankly, are not living in an era where mass movements in general have had much success in terms of actually moving public policy, or even like preventing the things they're trying to prevent, not even like getting a positive result, but just like stop doing this. And so I think that's why a lot of people have observed this, that there's this weird alliance between the very young, who are like fed up with the system as it is and have been ground down by it, and then the very elderly,
Yes.
like Bernie Sanders.
There's like this weird connect between like Gen X and the silent generation that no one talks about, that I think is a lot stronger than a lot of people realize.
Right. And I mean, part of it, it's just like Bernie Sanders lived in a different world. He knows a different world is possible because he lived in it. And like somebody like Mayor Pete or whatever didn't. this has been how it always was, and this is the only way it can be, I think, in his mind. I mean, he's exceptionally uncreative, but, you know.
Talk to me about neoliberalism and today's Democrats and Republicans. And when we talk about the Republicans, I guess we should talk about the two wings of the Republican Party, that small civil conflict that they have, the mini civil war they're having between the Trumpsters and the quote unquote traditional Republicans.
Yeah, I've tended to view Trumpism as kind of like a stupider version of neoliberalism.
Wait a minute, I need to slow that for a minute. Very good. All right. Continue, please.
Well, it's a blunt instrument version of neoliberalism instead of, like a surgical precision strike. It's just, it's very much, we're not carving things out. We're just going to punch through.
Right.
Kind of version of it. It's brutish and tacky, like Donald Trump.
And you get things like the EPA has been run by people who are basically trying to troll the very idea of environmental protection or something like that. But I think there's also, the core conviction of neoliberalism is that everything should be a zero-sum competition that reveals who's a winner and who's a loser. And that's clearly Trump's ethos. But Trump takes it a step further, and he's like, he apparently believes he has insight into who should be winning, above all himself. And if the competition is not turning out that way, it must have been rigged. And I think we see that in its most absurd and dangerous form in the lies that he was telling about the election, that he was willing to go to almost any length to get this result overturned. And it must have been cheating because the right person, Donald Trump, did not win. Similarly, like, the white working class is not winning. This must mean that, China is cheating us, or illegal immigrants are stealing our jobs, or whatever. And he has like a more conspiratorial version that thinks that the system must be rigged against him and his people in some way. But that's a kind of a variation on the theme. Republicans, the mainstream Republicans, I think their biggest worry is that the system is not punitive enough, that people are getting benefits or the benefit of the doubt or something that they don't deserve. And so, like, Trump is a more extreme version of it, but I think there's a reason he was able to slide so neatly into that position and rally so many followers within the Republican camp and exercise such profound control over them. If he was really the outsider that he claimed to be, that would have been impossible. So the Republicans and Trump especially are focused on the punitive side of the market. Like, the market is meant to keep down those who deserve to be down. Democrats think, well, there's a redemptive side to markets too. The exceptional, the hardworking, the talented, from every demographic, can succeed if the market is set up fairly, if the impediments to the market are removed. And so there's like this range of political opinion that's actually objectively very narrow, between people who think the market can redeem some individuals to the market probably should mostly be condemning people to penury and misery and humiliation, to then Trump saying, oh, the wrong people have been chosen for humiliation. Let me humiliate the right people.
Where is Bernie Sanders in all this?
I think he's trying to break with the market by getting out of this idea that we need the market to tell us who deserves what. Something like Medicare for All is just a universal, unconditional benefit that no matter how you got sick, no matter if you have a job, no matter if you smoke a pack a day, no matter what, you deserve health care. And we're a society, we can afford to do this. We're going to do this. We're going to help you get the care you need without asking, do you deserve it? And I think that it's so impoverished that like the idea of having social programs is what socialism is now. But I mean, that shows like how far gone we are, that for the radical challenge I think that Bernie Sanders represents to neoliberalism is to stop asking, do people deserve it? Just saying, can we give it to them? Do they need it? Okay, then we give it to them. And he's not aiming to abolish capitalism or the market or anything. Like, he's not even wanting to go back to how it was in the post-war era. But breaking with this kind of perverse moral logic where the market shows who's deserving and who's not, like that's viewed as a completely unacceptable threat by both Democrats and Republicans.
Explain this to me. Traditional conservatives, or whatever, Reagan conservatives, have been more free trade people, as I understand them. Donald J. Trump doesn't seem to be as much of a free trader. It's more of a me trader. How are they both neoliberals?
Yeah, I think both are trusting in the market and they're both trusting in competition, but it's a question of how to set up the rules of the game. And I think that both are kind of reacting to different circumstances. Trump maybe in a less informed way, but Reagan was reacting to a situation where unions were strong, where there was a lot of protectionism, where there were a lot of things that were keeping U.S. industries at this kind of high wage, high job security level. And free trade allowed for foreign competition from countries that didn't have that tradition of unionism, that didn't have as high of wages, to come in and kind of undercut those jobs and those unions. Now that
Jeff Bezos a robber baron?
I think Bezos is kind of a new phenomenon. I think there's an analogy with the robber baron. Yeah, there. I mean, Bezos would open a whole new can of worms, but
but there is sort of this, okay, you were extraordinarily lucky.
Yeah,
And have phenomenal amounts of wealth. You can say the same thing about your Bill Gateses and a lot of people who came up in the tech boom, but and they're showing different levels of how much they're willing to give back to society, and at what point does that coalescence of wealth demand that society say, hey, you need to give some of that back?
Right. Yeah, it seems like we haven't gotten there yet. I mean, Bezos gives like a farcically small amount of money. Like, I mean, you could say there's a lot negative to say about Gates and about his foundation and some of the priorities that he's chosen. Above all, like charter schools and things like that. Like, that's been very destructive. But he's also done a lot of good in the world, and he's like put a lot of his money towards that. And I think he is more farsighted probably than Bezos, in that he realizes that he needs to maintain some type of public support and legitimacy. I deserve this wealth because I'm using it to benefit people, the poor and downtrodden usually. Bezos doesn't seem to be at that point yet. But I think Bezos also is in a more powerful position. He's not as rich as he could be because Amazon mostly doesn't run a profit. Like, every so often stockholders like complain that they're not running a profit, and so he makes it so they run a profit for a couple quarters and then like the investors shut up. But I mean, his goal is effectively to take a cut of every retail transaction on earth. And he's like getting there. And to take a cut of all, web traffic, like he's basically taking over the infrastructure of the internet and the economy at an accelerating rate due to COVID, now that we're much more reliant on deliveries too. So I think he's got a much more insidious form of power than Bill Gates, who at the end of the day is reliant on like one particular type of product, whereas Jeff Bezos is potentially, like, he's in a position to very seriously transform the world economy, frankly, with no democratic accountability and no one to counterbalance him.
Does evangelical punitive culture, does that cause punitive neoliberalism?
I think the two definitely go hand in hand. I grew up in that culture, and I've written a little bit about that. And there's controversy kind of about where these evangelicals came from, how deep their history goes. And I think the evangelicals that we know today, like the religious right, the type of people who listen to DC talk or something like this, that have their like weird Christian subculture that has like a Christian version of everything. My kind of maximalist claim is that they are a native neoliberal religion, that they came up in neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is their native language. That if you look at things like their emphasis on church growth, like that's a very, a church is better if it's bigger, if it's convincing more people, if it's bringing in more money, if it's got better facilities.
Yeah. And the whole prosperity gospel thing, like if the church is successful, then you'll be successful, blah, blah, blah. Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, I kind of, maybe there's part of me that's still defensive of some aspects of it just because I don't want to associate myself with it. Like I wouldn't view prosperity gospel as being evangelical. That's more of like off to the side of it, but I might just be bullshitting or something like that. But
no, I don't know. I don't draw. I think the line between evangelicalism and marketing is fuzzier than you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair.
And like I went to an evangelical college, and I get the alumni magazine, and it is like more creepy, like corporate smiling, shining people every time. Like that they're really doubling down on this. We can get you a job. You can prosper through Christ. Like it wasn't quite like that when I was there. At least it wasn't as overt, or at least maybe I just wasn't running in the right circles or something like that. But it definitely has gotten much more materialistic. Like I think it's symbolic that Jerry Falwell Sr. was a pastor, and Jerry Falwell Jr. is an MBA businessman.
Yeah.
He's not actually a preacher, but he's one of the biggest evangelical leaders out there today.
Good point. What did 2008, the economic crisis, what does that tell us about neoliberalism? What did it do to neoliberalism?
I think that prior to 2008, neoliberalism made promises about economic growth, about a rising tide lifting all boats. These promises were mostly false, but they made promises at least. They at least promised some type of benefit to people. After the financial crisis, which was a system-wide shock that affected everybody, regardless of what they had done, which therefore disrupted the idea that the market is rewarding and punishing people according to what they did. It can't be the case that everybody in society up and decided to make the wrong economic choices and deserve to be punished, right? Like that's nonsense. That this should have forced a reckoning, I think. This should have been an inflection point. But due to the fact that for a generation, both parties had been purging anybody who had ideas that weren't neoliberal, there was nobody in a position of power who was in any place to do anything but reapply neoliberalism. And it became kind of like Margaret Thatcher's claim, there is no alternative. Like that was more of an agenda or a threat or something like that, or like a goal. Whereas after 2008, there is no alternative seemed to me there is therefore no hope, because neoliberalism obviously is not going to deliver the kind of economic growth and job growth and growth and opportunity for individuals that it even falsely claimed to have before. By the time COVID hit, wage levels and employment levels were back basically to where they were right before the crisis. And then they were, of course, blown out of the water by a second massive crisis that, again, destroyed this moral logic. Like, nobody deserves to get a brand new disease that came out of nowhere, right?
Did 2008, the Great Recession, did that bring about Trump and Trumpism?
I think it started a sequence of events that culminated in Trump. I don't think that Trump was the necessary result of that. But if you can see, like the Tea Party movement as a predecessor to Trump, they were already starting to say these type of conspiratorial ideas. They were already saying like, oh, a crisis happened. It must somehow be minorities who are to blame. You know, so they fantasized that like federally subsidized mortgages for Black people were what caused this whole thing. There was already this sense that the system must be broken, but there was no left-wing alternative to counter the right-wing racist alternative. The Democrats were satisfied that the system had been restored to how it should be. And the Republicans rightly recognizing that there was something wrong with it. But since they have no actual social theory or social thought, they fell back on the social thought of idiots, which is racism. And I think given that the Democrats successfully kept Bernie Sanders' challenge from going through, the only real alternative was something like Trump. And I think that the events that led to him taking office over Hillary Clinton, I think there was a lot of chance involved. I think that there is an alternate timeline that's very plausible. I even think, and I'm going to get canceled for this, I'm sure, I think that Nate Silver's prediction that there was an 85% chance that Hillary would win was right. Yeah. Because clearly the outcome was very, like, what are the odds, right? I guess they probably were around 15% that this would happen.
You know, unless you actually play Dungeons and Dragons or other kind of role-playing games that actually
probability understanding, yeah.
You know, I mean, you roll the D100, you roll these two, you know, and I tell you, you start appreciating what 15% looks like.
You don't even need a D100.
Well, that's a thing that, like, I always used to say that to people, just like, you know, man, like, they're just like, well, they've got an 80% chance to win. And I'm just like, all right, so, you know, if you went out on a date and you had an 80% chance it was definitely going to go well, how'd you feel about that? Like, you know,
right? And even like 15% is almost like 1 out of 6.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. I mean, you roll a dice, you know, like sometimes you do roll a 6, right? Like it happens.
Right.
So I mean, there's a lot of people, I think, who were very retrospectively fatalistic about Trump. Like, this is the truth of America. This is like the only way it could have turned out. I don't think that it's the only way it could have turned out. I do think, though, that neoliberalism is wired for very close elections. That the two parties converged on very similar platforms, and like by design, I think the system was converging on a situation where divided government would be very common, where neither side would have like an overwhelming mandate. And given that we're, you know, the death trap of a constitution we have,
presumably that's something that like ranked choice voting is seeking to address, at least in principle, and who knows if it'll work or not, but
right. I mean, I would be happy with just like the person who gets the most votes becomes president. Like, we aren't even at
that level. Adam, you just said death trap of a constitution. I'm intrigued with that. Please talk about that.
You know, I've long been a critic of the Constitution, which was drafted by slaveholders and their allies. The express purpose of this convoluted compromise was to keep the slavers on board. when push came to shove, it did not even keep the slavers on board because the Civil War occurred. And then, insanely, the same Constitution was kept in place with just a couple of amendments after a Civil War had been fought. And it seems like there have been so many missed opportunities in U.S. history. I think that not abolishing the Constitution and starting from scratch after the Civil War was number one. FDR probably could have done it as well. There's just, the Constitution was designed to prevent any large-scale challenge to concentrated wealth. And it has worked for the most part. I mean, even in the post-war era, industry was going along with this plan and was prospering greatly. Madison, when they say that they want to prevent the tyranny of the majority, they want to protect the minority. Like, clearly, the founders were not thinking of minorities in the sense that we do, right?
Right.
In any society, though, the very wealthy are by definition a minority. That's the minority they wanted to protect, and they have. And they set it up so that it's almost impossible to amend. They set up this cult of this quasi-divination of the...
It would have been easy, like when they originally set it up and it was just the 13 colonies, that, getting a 2/3 vote of 13 colonies versus trying to get like Portland to get along with Little Rock. These are very different places now, and the place is much bigger than the original bounds were designed. Yeah. I
mean, it's ludicrous that that we're still operating within the same system. It's the oldest continuous operating constitution in the world. And again, it was designed in order to reinforce slave power. It was designed to give slave states like disproportionate influence to make sure slavery wouldn't get abolished. And we're still using this today. This is absurd. This is absolutely absurd. And I'm watching, social media today that Mitch McConnell has pulled his usual thing yet again. He's trying to obstruct like the formation of the new Senate majority and the appointment of people to the various committee heads and whatever. And I'm just like, this is an institution that should not even exist.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What would you have a magic wand? How would you change things? How would you change the Constitution?
I would make it be a pure parliamentary system. I would abolish the states. And I mean, there could be some form of local government, but it wouldn't be the quasi-autonomous states that each have their own like little mini constitution and their own mini bicameral legislature. That's absolutely ridiculous.
I would definitely change the way that Congress is formed as far as, like how many members there are, because one of the weird statistics that I figured out a little while ago is that if proportionally, like UK's parliament versus the US federal government, if Congress had as many members per population as they do in the UK, there'd be like 3,000 something members of Congress.
And
like I feel like they're just representing districts that are way too big for anyone to actually get a handle on.
And if Congress was much bigger like that, the impact of gerrymandering would be
greatly reduced.
Less,
right.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, that's a good point.
But I think that independently electing the president and the legislature is a recipe for disaster. That in a parliamentary system, the majority of the legislature can remove the executive at any time with a simple majority vote. And to have the executive be kind of the creature of the legislative creates this kind of like a much greater accountability than in our system, where I think it's been shown by historical experience that impeaching the president is impossible. It's a dead letter. There is no way to remove a president effectively.
Yep.
Whereas a prime minister can be removed by a simple majority of parliament voting no confidence on them.
And I've pointed this out many times on this channel and other people's shows, that this is one of the core issues here in this country, is that the presidency is imperial in that way. In many ways, it is just untouchable. And with the accumulation of power in the presidency, it's scary. That's what it is.
And the fact that Donald Trump could take power on the strength of a 3 million vote loss, never achieving majority support in the population, and still face zero accountability and have no ability to remove him. Like, the fact that the presidency is so imperialistic makes it that much more dangerous that the loser of the vote can take power. I think we saw that with Bush as well. When they didn't get into power due to popular approval, they don't feel like they owe the people much of anything. And that's
true.
bad.
It's funny, we're talking about states. I was talking with my girlfriend, my daughter, last night at the dinner table, and we were talking about extradition policies, going like, Trump goes down to Florida. If New York wants to, bring him back to stand trial on something, they have to fill out an extradition, form, some kind of legal process. And she had no idea. And let me tell you, Adam, she's a lot smarter than I am. She's a lot smarter, but she had no idea that states actually have to go through a process to extradite criminals or people accused of criminality.
Yeah. And I mean, there's some state, like reportedly New Mexico won't garnish your wage for other states' child support or something like that. So it's like the hub of deadbeat dads or something. Why should this loophole exist? What's the justification for that? Yeah,
exactly. So where does Barack Obama play in all this? You have the 2008 disaster. You have this huge crisis to the system. Neoliberalism in trouble, and Barack Obama comes on the scene. How does he hold it together?
Yeah, I think clearly his goal was to hold it together pretty much as it had been. His goal was to restore the status quo ante, and he was broadly successful in doing that. That was not a worthy goal for him to devote his considerable talents to. I think that the paradox of Obama is I can see other circumstances where he could have been a truly transformative leader. He's clearly a very, charismatic, very intelligent, more creative than Mayor Pete, etc.
Yeah.
But coming up through this system of meritocracy and constantly kind of moving from strength to strength within the system, when you've been empowered by the system like that, you're in no position to question it, right? Like, if I'm questioning the system, I'm questioning the benefits that I've gotten. I'm questioning my own legitimacy. He went to all the right schools. He, made friends with all the right people. He had all the right network, and he was just going to preside over the kind of self-repair and self-regulation of that system. In a recent interview, he basically acknowledged the existence of neoliberalism, which is not allowed by politicians. He said, you know what? I think Democrats have been a little seduced. We've been too reliant on the market. We've been too given to the assumption that the parameters that Reagan gave us are the only way that things can be done. And we probably need to break with that. I'm like, well, thank you. Now that you're out of power and can never be president again, now you're finally saying these true things.
People seem to find their spines when they're out of office, Adam.
Yes.
So how do you see the system developing from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to see a path forward, frankly, because, Joe Biden, not a meritocrat. I think he realizes that he's a pretty average Joe or whatever, but somebody who has been basically marinating in the system all his life. And he's clearly past his prime too. He's extremely elderly. This is kind of crazy. I don't think that he is has the wherewithal or the inclination to do the kind of changes that would be necessary to really, clean house and reform the economy to break with this neoliberal paradigm. I've seen a lot of commentators actually say that given the size of the relief bills that have been proposed, that this is a break with neoliberalism. And I think that that's not accurate. I think that these relief bills are basically a bailout, and they're meant to avoid any restructuring of the economy. They're meant to keep people limping through until they can get back to how things were in the past. You can see this in the fact that the unemployment system is the main venue for they're trying to still keep people tied to the job market, et cetera. So,
if we don't fix the system, if we don't fix deal with neoliberalism, are we just going to get Trump 2.0 in 4 years and 8 years or 12 years?
I don't know. I think that Trump is a very unique individual, and that talking about a new Trump is a strange thing to me. I just don't understand why people think that he's so easily substitutable. I mean, yes, we are probably going to get more.
He makes a great cartoon character on that show that Colbert does. It's because he fits this box that everybody understands. It's kind of the devil you know instead of the devil you don't kind of thing. He's a known quantity.
Yeah. And and the fact that he's been a public figure his entire life for unclear reasons. Why were we ever paying attention to him?
I think one thing that we can take from the whole Trump trajectory is that, he started having ideas about running for president 20 years ago. And it was a whole process. And why didn't that process get derailed along the line is the part that I think that everybody needs to grapple with and be like, why wasn't there anything that stopped that from, being his ambition? I don't know.
Right. And I mean, the 2016 election was the Republicans to lose, they just needed to nominate a warm body, especially if they're running against Hillary Clinton, who's for whatever reason, the most controversial politician in the world, even though she's objectively just a boring, regular Democrat. I think that Mitt Romney is a great example here. Mitt Romney is a meritocratic, middle of the road neoliberal at heart. But when he was running for president, facing the pressure of the Tea Party and the prospect of all these right-wing primary challengers and the need to kind of motivate the base, he had to kind of mouth these things.
Yeah.
I don't think that we're going to get another Trump just simply because Trump is irreplaceable. But I think that that every Republican nominee is going to face considerable pressure to adopt Trump-like positions to kind of motivate the Trump base, unless Trump splits and forms a new party or something like that.
Right.
And I have seen no indication that there are any national level Republican politicians with any integrity at all to resist that.
Right. How does, I was reading in your book, Neoliberalism's Demons, another plug for your book here, about how neoliberalism affects family structure. How does neoliberalism affect family structure?
One of the main goals of neoliberal cuts to safety net programs, one of their stated goals was to replace the public safety net with the private safety net of the family. That if, for instance, if you don't think that you're going to have a public pension in the form of Social Security, you're going to keep close with your kids so that they will take care of you when you get old. And similarly, if you don't think that you can just run off and go to college basically for free, and you need family support to do that and to get your start in life, you're going to have a lot closer relationship with your parents.
Or you're in an abusive relationship and you need money and food and a place to live. No
real way to escape that either. I'd like to hope that wasn't one of their primary goals, but certainly they didn't care that was a side effect.
Right.
If you think about a few years ago, the millennials, there was this big crisis that millennials were not moving out of the home, that they were too dependent on their parents, et cetera, et cetera. That was a policy success. Every millennial living in their parents' basement is a policy success from neoliberalism. And yet
that is fascinating.
Yeah.
So you're saying it's not a bug of the system, it's baked in there for that intentional reason.
Right, to increase, to make the family the center, not the public sphere. And because keeping the family in that central role was a good way to maintain social hierarchy as well, because, for instance, it's a very different thing for a white middle class person to have only their family to fall back on versus a poor black family. How can that latter person expect to get ahead? It's a much harder climb. So a lot of this reliance on the market was basically a way of laundering social hierarchy and making it so that you could blame individuals for their place in the hierarchy. You had a chance to compete, you failed, you suck, okay, that you deserve to be on the bottom, whereas you're set up to fail. I think the millennial example is great, because the millennial living in the basement was so derided and so taken to be this social crisis and what a lazy loser. But they were following every incentive that the system set up, and then they were blamed for following those incentives. That's what I mean by the logic of entrapment, that you're set up to fail. Neoliberalism sets us up to fail so that it can say, you lose because you're a loser. You deserve the spot that you have. And I think it really tries to mobilize emotions of shame and humiliation to keep people from asking for more.
I think you're right. Spot on with that. You're spot on. So this is going to be a question. If you don't have an answer, I'll just edit this out. Is Fight Club, the movie Fight Club, a response to neoliberalism?
I think it is.
You made my night right there, Adam.
Yes, I think it is an attempt to, and I mean the solution they come up with is ambivalent at best. An all male community beating the shit out of each other and then engaging in terrorism. I'm not going to say that I'm on board with that, but the life that he's rejecting, the IKEA commercial life, the IKEA catalog life, and the kind of insurance adjuster who is willing to let people die if it doesn't, meet the bottom line or something like that. Both sides of those, the kind of homogenization of the world through a single, consumer product, combined with this kind of financialization and callous disregard for humanity. I think that's what breaks Jack and causes him to seek these radical solutions. And I think while I reject this, the misogyny and the violence of the Fight Club, I think the fact that they want to blow up the credit card company gets at something true.
Right. Magic. We're going to leave all that in.
I would point out that they make sure that nobody is in the buildings before they
do. They do. And
very sure.
To be sure, yes.
Yeah, it's a very humane way. Adam, we're closing in on our time. We'd like to ask our guests, is there a question you wanted us to ask you, but we didn't? Not about plugs where people can find you online, but was there a topic you wanted us to breach with you, to discuss with you, but we just didn't get around to it, or we didn't think of it?
Oh, I mean, you said that you wanted me to correct the name of the philosopher that I wrote about.
Yes.
Agamben.
Agamben. Okay, very good.
That's it. Other than that,
that's it. That's it. Well, I have to tell you.
We've never gotten to that question.
I've never got that question yet.
Adam, thanks for coming on the show, the Late Show. This has been a lot of fun. I think people are going to find a lot of value in our conversation, and it's going to open some doors for them to think about neoliberalism and where they fit in the machine, so to speak.
Okay. Well, yeah, I had a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Where can people find you online?
On Twitter, it's at Adam Kotsko, and I have my professional site where you can read my articles and stuff at it's just adamkotsko.com.
Yeah. And I just want to add to everyone who's watching, who's listening, we have just hit the tip of the iceberg here. There's like notes and stuff that I have, but and there's articles on Adam's site that you should take a look at. And of course, you should buy his book, Neoliberalism's Demons, and check them out. Check them out.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, everyone. Thanks for clicking over, taking a look at the show. Adam, once again, thanks. Jack, what do you got going on, brother?
Right now I'm kind of in an in-between period. So I'm just kind of doing this show for the next couple Sundays. And then, like I mentioned, TSTVHQ is doing their Lupercalia thing. So please go buy tickets to that, because that's going to be amazing. They're doing a whole bunch of really cool events. Go check out the site and see what tickets they're selling, because they've got some really cool events that I'm just happy to be kind of off in the background doing the stagehand kind of stuff on. So that'll be fun.
Fantastic. And of course, I do a show from 9 o'clock in the morning till whenever, typically 9:45 or 10 o'clock, Monday through Friday. And of course, I'm here every Sunday night at 10:30. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone. Take care. Be strong.